Over the last 150 years, approximately 1,500 people have been hanged in the United Kingdom. Many of those desperately protested their innocence.
Could some of these long-standing convictions have been a miscarriage of justice?
There's a question mark over when precisely Frederick Morton was shot.
Barristers Sasha Wass and Jeremy Dean have been investigating these life-changing cases.
He cut off her head, dismembered her, and buried her in a place where he hoped she would never be found.
Representing living relatives, desperate to clear their family name.
The more you read about it, he could have been innocent.
With the help of modern-day experts,
she's been assaulted with a weapon, and there's been more than one blow.
they reassess the evidence.
We have a blood-stained knife. I simply don't understand the logic.
Before submitting their findings to a Crown Court judge.
Your Honour ought to declare the conviction for murder to be unsafe.
Now, as we reunite the barristers and the family members for the first time.
Hello, Gordon.
Hi.
We'll be finding out exactly what happened next.
They were told by the coroner that they had to find him guilty.
Yes.
Was justice served?
It's perfectly conceivable that Judge Radford got it wrong.
And are the unexplained cases finally closed? Today, the barristers are reopening the case file on a controversial murder from 1840. A young woman found drowned in a canal. A rowdy drunken boat crew put on trial. And a conviction that led to the public execution of 2 men.
Jeremy, what was extraordinary about this case is what we learnt about the legal system in 1839. It bore absolutely no resemblance to the criminal justice system as we understand it today.
I agree, Sasha. And in my view, what happened here is that George Thomas was convicted of the murder of Christina Collins in the absence of any evidence whatsoever that he was involved in that murder.
Well, the evidence was tenuous, certainly.
Later, Jeremy and Sasha will be meeting up with George Thomas's relative Jeanette to find out exactly what's happened since the judgment. But first, a look at this controversial case. June 1839. A woman's screams were heard along a Staffordshire canal. 37-year-old Christina Collins was being terrorised by a group of boatmen. She was travelling to meet her new husband in London, but there proved to be no escape from this boat. The next day, Christina's body was pulled from the water. Suspicion fell heavily on one of the boatmen, 27-year-old George Thomas. Despite professing his innocence, Thomas was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. On the 11th of April 1840, he was hanged along with the boat's skipper in front of 10,000 spectators. Now, 180 years on, George Thomas's relative Jeanette is desperate for justice.
This is where I start with my family tree. It was my father who started the ball rolling with this case by telling me when I was about 8 or 9 that we'd got a murderer in the family. And then this line here goes up to William Thomas, who is George Thomas's brother. I feel sorry that Christina Collins was murdered and there is a victim in this terrible crime. I'm not saying that the men were angels, but I think George Thomas was used as a scapegoat, but I don't think he did murder her. If my dad was still alive now, he'd be sitting here by the side of me, proud that we could finally try and clear George Thomas's name and get a good reputation back for him. Because my dad always told me about George, I'm doing it for him mainly, and for my mum, who started me on this amazing family journey.
George Thomas's trial was contentious, turning on the testimony of a dubious key witness. But was it a miscarriage of justice? And can a modern legal team cast the conviction in a different light? Defence barrister Jeremy Dean QC has defended high-profile clients for over 3 decades. For the prosecution is Sasha Wass QC, who's represented the Crown in some of the UK's most famous criminal cases. Jeanette has travelled to London to meet the barristers to try and find out the truth.
Hello, Jeanette.
Hello.
Jeremy, nice to meet you.
And you?
Jeanette, hello.
Hello.
Sasha, hi.
Well, thanks for coming. Do you feel you know enough about the case to have a belief that George Thomas was wrongly hanged for murder?
Although he was a bit of a naughty lad, I don't believe that he did the murder now.
Why not?
The captain had a little bit more to do with it than what was believed.
We'll keep you updated.
Thank you.
And thank you very much indeed for coming.
It's a
It's
pleasure.
been really nice meeting you.
And you,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
George Thomas was born in Staffordshire in 1812 into a farming family and grew up in the civil parish of Wombourne. As a teenager, Thomas found work on commercial narrowboats that ran freight up and down the industrial artery of early Victorian England, the Trent and Mersey Canal. At age 27, he took up with a new crew on a Pickford's flyboat that operated round-the-clock intercity canal haulage. On the boat was a boy called William Musson, veteran captain James Owen, and 28-year-old boatman William Ellis. Thomas had only been employed on this flyboat for less than a fortnight when Christina Collins died. But could this young, hard-working man really have been responsible for her death?
There are a number of witnesses who saw what is said to have occurred. They paint a picture of a drunken group of men sexually abusing and intimidating Christina. They claimed that she'd been suicidal and had fallen into the water. In fact, there were 2 trials. The first trial was for serious sexual assault. The judge, in fact, found that there was insufficient evidence and acquitted the defendants. There followed a trial for murder, and another witness gave evidence for the prosecution, and Owen, Ellis and George Thomas were found guilty of murder. So what do you think about this case, Sasha?
What I'd like to do is find out why there were 2 trials, and I'd like to look into the criminal procedure that existed in those days, because we're going back to 1839.
Christina was born in 1801 in Nottingham. She worked as a magician's assistant to her first husband, but was widowed young and had no children. Christina remarried a stableman, Robert Collins, and was on her way to start a new life with him in London before she met her tragic death. But was George Thomas more of a culprit than any of the other boatmen? Jeanette wants to understand the event that altered the course of her family history 180 years ago. She's come to the scene of the crime and is meeting her cousin Patricia, also a descendant of George Thomas.
It feels quite eerie being stood here where it actually happened, the place where she met her death.
Christina was the only passenger on board. The crew drank heavily from whiskey they were transporting. At midnight on the 16th of July, the boat reached the final lock Christina was witnessed at, as the boatman became increasingly abusive towards Christina. She got on and off the boat several times. At around 3 a.m., things took a fatal turn.
So this is where she actually met her death here.
Christina's body was carried up a passageway that's become etched into local folklore in the town of Rugeley.
So, Pat, why are these called the Bloody Steps?
The original ones were said to have been stained with Christina's blood as they dragged her up the steps. These steps have been a legend for 180 years now. It must have been quite horrendous how they roughly dragged her out of the water and just dragged her up to the top of those steps.
Yes.
There again, this place is eerie too.
I think, to me, this seems quite haunting.
This is very much part of our family history.
Definitely the main part.
The men reported their passenger missing at the next lock. By this time, however, a manhunt was already in full swing. The crew were quickly arrested and faced a coroner's inquest that very day in a local inn, before they'd even had time to sober up. No fewer than 24 witnesses gave testimony against them. Sasha and Jeremy are examining their accounts.
Now, Christina Collins, at 7 o'clock on Saturday the 15th of June, boarded the Pickford Company boat at Preston Brook. Here. She was travelling south on the Trent and Mersey Canal. The following day, at 8 o'clock that evening, the boat had reached Stone, and Hugh Cornwall, who was a check clerk, heard Christina complaining that she feared that the men she was with were going to meddle with her. That's the expression that she used.
Although Christina Collins was still on and off the boat.
She was still associating with the people,
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. By midnight, the boat had reached Who Mill Lock. And two witnesses, Anne and James Mills, who lived in the lock house, were awakened by female screaming. And they were obviously concerned, and they asked one of the men on the boat, they're not sure which man it was, whether the woman was with anyone. And that man replied that she was with her husband, which of course was not true. So at 5 a.m, Christina's body is retrieved from the canal at Brindley Bank.
Christina Collins remained in and around the boat for the whole time. She could have distanced herself. She could have left. She could have complained in clear terms as to what she felt might happen to her or what was happening to her, but she didn't. Principally, however, bearing in mind that George Thomas was found guilty of murder, and indeed others were too, nothing you've said directly implicates George Thomas in the murder of Christina Collins.
At the 4-day inquest, Captain Owen claimed Thomas had sexually abused Christina Collins, aided and abetted by Ellis, and that afterwards, she'd taken her own life. While Thomas claimed the captain was her attacker. All of the boatmen were charged with murder. Additional charges of rape, common assault and theft were also laid. But what really happened that night aboard the narrowboat? Jeanette and Patricia have come to the Black Country Living Museum. They're meeting canal expert Wendy Freer, who's researched the case thoroughly.
What type of situation would it have been for a lady to have come onto this scene?
All boatmen were said to drink heavily, swear a lot, get into fights. Their reputation was just dreadful. The fact that these boatmen had been drinking heavily throughout the voyage was nothing unusual. And poor Christina would never have consented to go on that long journey by herself with these men unless there was no alternative. She just didn't have the money to get there any other way.
Wendy, what do you think about George Thomas and his part in this?
What we do know about George Thomas is that he took against Christina pretty much from the start. He objected to her coming into the boatman's cabin. He thought she should be in her own place in the passenger space. He also had a big row with the captain over this and threatened to leave.
He kept changing his story as well, didn't he, the captain, with the boy, whereas George Thomas and William Ellis...
They were consistent.
Yes, I think that's right. I think the other important thing is, when did George Thomas realise that she was missing? Because it seems to have happened between Colwich Lock and Brindley's Bank. Now, that was the stretch where Thomas and Ellis were asleep and Owen was steering. So at what point did Owen alert Thomas to the fact that the passenger was missing? Because it was the two of them who went back to look for her.
I thought it looked like the captain knew that she had drowned and was saying to George Thomas, let's go and look for her to cover for himself.
It does look as if Owen was the one who knew what happened. Musson, the boy, was driving the horse. Now, it seems that the other two were still asleep at that point.
As suspicion gathered around Captain Owen, the first trial against the boatman commenced in July 1839. Charges against the boy Musson were dropped, and the judge directed the jury to find the boatman not guilty of rape due to lack of evidence. But astonishingly, before the murder charge could be considered, the prosecution produced a key witness, a convicted cellmate of Captain Owen, called Joseph Orgill. The murder trial was postponed until this prisoner could testify at a second trial. That could only happen after he'd been pardoned, a bonus which at the time Orgill claimed he knew nothing about. Sasha and Jeremy want an insight into why this occurred. They're meeting legal historian Dr. Philip Handler.
Now, Mr. Orgill was convicted of bigamy and was serving a sentence of imprisonment when he came to share a cell with Owen, the captain of the boat. And Orgill gave evidence of what Owen had told him. So we're talking about multiple hearsay now. And what Owen was said to have said was this: the other two men, that's Ellis and Thomas, committed the rape upon her and mauled her to death. Our opinion, by the modern day rules of hearsay, is that this would not have been admissible before a jury.
Well, there was a rule against hearsay, but there were exceptions to that rule, one of which involved confessions. And another significant difference between then and now is that the trial judge had much more discretion to admit such evidence, but then advise the jury as to how much weight they should attach to it.
But this was not a confession by Owen. He was effectively blaming Thomas and Ellis.
And the evidence was coming from a convicted criminal.
So a tainted
Yes.
source.
Yes. Orgill maintained, I think, in the second trial that he knew nothing of the pardon until the actual date of the trial. In a letter which I have here, the prison governor had said to Orgill that a pardon could be the outcome.
So Orgill must have lied when he told the jury that he had no idea that a pardon would ensue.
Yes, he must have lied. A number of people wrote into the Home Office to discredit the character of Joseph Orgill. So we have one here from a number of inhabitants of Burton-upon-Trent, which is where Orgill was from, indicating that he was indeed a completely disreputable character whose evidence shouldn't be given any weight at all.
And more significant than the fact that he lied, that there is evidence that he did in fact have an incentive to lie at the trial about his knowledge of what took place.
Yes, that's significant. In 1839, there was no appeal court, no mechanism for quashing a conviction. The only practical remedy for someone convicted at this time was to petition the Crown for a pardon.
On the 16th of March 1840 at Staffordshire Hall, the boatman's second trial began for the murder of Christina Collins. Her cause of death was central to the case. To examine the medical evidence further, Sasha and Jeremy are meeting forensic pathologist, Professor Peter Vanezes. He studied the report of the surgeon who testified 180 years ago, Mr. Samuel Barnett.
Mr. Barnett concludes death was occasioned by suffocation from drowning.
I wouldn't use the word suffocation because that has other implications. Indicates that perhaps the person may have been in some other way incapacitated before they went into the water.
Right.
There's no evidence that there's been a struggle in terms of any bruising on her body or restraint Now, what he's seeing in terms of the engorged lungs and most likely the water in the stomach as well is that the person died of wet drowning, the classical type of drowning. So she was alive when she entered the water. If she was unconscious, I would have expected her reflexes to have been diminished.
Yeah.
Therefore, unlikely to swallow that amount
Yes.
of water
Yeah.
in the stomach.
Right.
So
right.
my guess is that she was probably alive and conscious. Carrying out a case like hers today, I would just simply call it drowning.
Orgill's evidence gives an account of Thomas and Ellis mauling Christina to death. The pathological evidence that we've seen in this case makes it quite plain that Christina would have been conscious because she swallowed a large amount of water. The one area where we can test Orgill's evidence demonstrates that it is unreliable.
Despite Orgill testifying at trial, none of the accounts from Owen, Ellis, or George Thomas were heard. As the case concluded, Judge Baron Gurney delivered his verdict. All three men were guilty. Jeanette and Patricia have come to the very courthouse in Stafford to read reports on the sentencing of the boatmen, including their relative, George Thomas.
Here I have the sentence of the death passed upon the prisoners. You have been found guilty of the foul crime of murder. Murder committed on an unoffending and helpless woman who was under your protection and who, there is reason to believe, was first the object of your lust and then, to prevent detection for the crime, was the object of your cruelty. The case is one of the most painful, the most disgusting and the most shocking that ever came under my knowledge, and it remains for me only to pass upon you the awful sentence of the law. That you be taken to the place from whence you came and from thence to the place of execution, and that you and each of you be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and that your bodies afterwards be buried within the precincts of the prison. And may God have mercy on your souls.
It is hard how we've looked at all the evidence now and then we read this. It's sort of brought it home, and it is difficult to read.
On the 11th of April 1840, Owen, Ellis and George Thomas were read their last rites by the chaplain at Stafford Prison. Outside, a crowd of 10,000 people were waiting by the public gallows for the unusual spectacle of a triple execution. As the men were being led to the hangman, an incredible intervention was staged. "28-year-old William Ellis was granted a last-minute reprieve and spared the noose. But if clemency was sufficient for Ellis, why not for George Thomas? With Judgment Day looming, the barristers want to scrutinise this peculiar reprieve.
Ellis's sentence was commuted from the death penalty, and he was ordered to be transported to Australia for 14 years. And it was very dramatic because, in fact, Ellis, Thomas and Owen had all received the last sacrament from the prison chaplain. And after receiving that, expecting immediate death, Ellis was reprieved in the presence of the other two. And on hearing the news that he was not going to lose his life, he immediately burst into tears and was very affectionate with his co-defendants, as indeed they were to him, saying to them, "God bless you, dear boys."
Enabling Ellis to secure a vastly different sentence to that which Thomas was subjected to just further compounds my concerns about the injustice to George Thomas.
George Thomas was hanged alongside Captain Owen outside the gates of Stafford Jail. Their bodies were buried within the prison grounds. Officer Stephen Edwards has brought Jeanette and Patricia to the location it's believed George Thomas rests.
There are actually 2 men in this grave we've seen here before us and 1 woman. It's maintained and cared for by men who are obviously locked up in Stafford Jail.
Would the prisoners of today mind if we lay these flowers for George?
Of course not.
And just before he was hung, he said that I didn't do this. I had nothing to do with it.
Terrible, terrible for him. You just can't imagine it.
Sasha and Jeremy have completed their investigation. They must put their submissions to Judge David Radford. Jeanette is hoping today her relative George Thomas can be exonerated for the murder of Christina Collins over 180 years ago.
Hopefully myself and the family will get the verdict that we would like, which is unsafe verdict.
Hi, Jeanette.
Hello.
Nice to see you again.
And you?
Hello, good to see you.
How are you feeling today?
Apprehensive, yes.
There's no guarantees,
No.
but the case has been looked at very thoroughly.
Yes.
All right?
Yes,
okay,
thank you.
so if you'd like to follow us, we'll head off to the judge's room.
Okay, thank you.
Sasha and Jeremy are ready to put their submissions before Judge Radford.
Please take a seat.
As a senior judge to the largest Crown Court in England and Wales, he's adjudicated over a wide range of high-profile cases.
I'm here today to inquire into the safety of the conviction of George Thomas, who was convicted together with co-accused of the murder of Mrs. Christina Collins. Mr. Dean.
It's my submission that George Thomas's conviction for murder is manifestly unsafe. That there is and was no eyewitness as to the circumstances in which he came to enter the water and die. Professor Peter Venetsis, a forensic pathologist, said that he could only limit his finding to one of drowning, not suffocation. There was a lot of water in her stomach, which indicates she may have been conscious when she entered. And the pathological evidence simply does not throw light on whether this might have been suicide, accidental death, or deliberate killing. There was a further serious complicating factor in the trial. A man was brought forward by the prosecution at very short notice. This man, Joseph Orgill, was placed in the box. He'd been convicted but had received a pardon for the bigamy he'd been sentenced to 18 months for. Orgill went on to say that Owen had told him that the killing of Christina Collins, and indeed her sexual assault, were perpetrated by George Thomas and Ellis, and that he, Owen, had said that it had nothing to do with him whatsoever. Furthermore, whilst Orgill maintained that he did not know that he'd been pardoned before he gave evidence, information has come to light in the course of this inquiry that Orgill had in fact been told that he would be pardoned before he gave evidence. Ultimately, without his evidence, there was no evidence of murder, and yet George Thomas, a young man, was hanged and lost his life. It's my submission, in all the circumstances, that his conviction is unsafe, and I invite Your Honour to declare in those terms.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Ms. Watts, what is your response?
Your Honour, this was a case where Orgill said that Owen was absolving himself but implicating his co-defendants. So in effect, this was self-serving evidence. It was the most tenuous type of hearsay one could imagine. Without Orgill, there is no evidence that Christina Collins' death was as a result of homicide at all. And there is nothing reliable in the evidence of Orgill which could possibly suggest that this verdict was safe. So I entirely agree with the submissions made by Mr. Dean.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Ross. Well, I shall consider these matters for myself. If you allow me some time to do that.
Thank you.
Did George Thomas brutally murder Christina Collins 180 years ago? Or was he a scapegoat who was wrongly executed at the age of just 27? The judge is now ready to deliver his verdict.
At the first trial of the boatman, the judge directed the jury to acquit those in the dock of the allegations of serious sexual assault. The trial on the other charges, including murder, should then have been continued. The prosecution called as a witness a convicted prisoner called Orgill, who claimed that Thomas's co-accused Owen, the boat captain, had told him, Orgill, in prison, that whilst he, Owen, had not committed murder, the other two still in the dock, Thomas and Ellis, had. This evidence constituted inadmissible hearsay. It was, anyway, evidence given by a man of little credibility in exchange for a free pardon. The reality is there were no eyewitnesses to assist any jury as to how or why Mrs. Collins came to be in the canal or how and why she drowned. There was no physical evidence of sexual or any other kind of assault found in relation to Mrs. Collins anyway. I am in absolutely no doubt that demonstrably and unarguably this was a completely unsafe conviction of murder. I shall rise.
Having reviewed the facts of the case, Jeremy and Sasha remain united in their view that the judge reached the correct decision.
Judge Radford clearly was not happy with George Thomas's conviction. His decision was unhesitating. It reflected the absence of evidence. It was the only possible decision that could be reached.
Well, Jeremy, I wasn't happy. From the moment I saw the quality of the evidence, I was hunting around as if there was going to be something tangible that formed the basis of this conviction, and no such evidence emerged. So I was very, very troubled by it. I'm interested to see what Jeanette's been up to since we last saw her.
Jeanette has travelled to London to meet the barristers for the first time since the judgment.
I'm really looking forward to it, to catch up with them and let them know how far we've gone and what we've been doing so far.
Jeanette.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you both again.
Yep, you too.
Come and sit down.
Thank you.
Now, last time we met was on the day of the decision by Judge Radford. How did you feel about that?
It took a while to sink in, and then on the way home on the train, I'm thinking, we did it.
Yes.
We finally did it, 180 years, and we've managed to do it.
Absolutely.
So would you say that you've been fired up by Judge Radford reaching the decision?
Yes, I definitely want to carry on. So I have been concentrated on William Ellis, who was at last minute reprieved and was sent on transportation to Van Diemen's in Australia. And I would like to try and find out if he did get married, if he had children, and if the story of what happened went down to modern day, if there is any ancestors he's got still alive today who can enlighten me on any of the story and if theirs was passed down.
And how have you gone about that?
I got in touch with a genealogist to see if she could help me with William Ellis, and she gave me some quite shocking news about him.
Jeanette met with genealogist Megan Owens in the hope of tracing William's life after the trial. She's uncovered papers that could shed light on why his life was spared.
I think that in that initial delay before the execution, they were sounding out all three men to work out who would be the best informant.
I see.
And they executed the other two as an example.
Right.
They wanted information about robberies on the canals. They wanted information about receiving of stolen goods and property. And so they actually held on to him all the way through 1841.
At news of William Ellis's reprieve, George Thomas cautioned him to make the most of this second chance. Did he take this advice? Meghan has a letter from the prison chaplain that could offer some insight.
He is saying that as chaplain, I have great pleasure on giving my unqualified impression of his conduct. He has behaved with the greatest decorum and seems deeply impressed with a sense of his situation. He has devoted much time to mental cultivation and religious improvement, and is, in my opinion, a fit and proper object for the royal clemency. So the visiting magistrates then approve this course of action and, by extension of the royal mercy, the remission of the remainder of his sentence is approved. So he's released.
Wow. In a way, it's nice that he did listen to what George said and did take heed. Hopefully he's learned the error of his ways and probably got married, had children and stayed on the straight and narrow.
Straight and narrow.
Once on the outside, was it a happy ending for George's fellow boatman?
An article showing that in 1847, so this is 6 years later.
Yes.
He was part of a robbery on the canal.
Oh,
I'm sorry. And he stole some malt, a cargo of malt. And two of the men absconded, one of them being William Ellis, alias Lambert. So he was on the run in 1847, and then about 10 months later, he's caught.
Oh, dear.
And he may have gone to court after this. He may have even been transported again, but there's no obvious trail for him. So from here, it would be possible with a bit more digging, perhaps, to see whether he remained in the UK, whether he ever was transported to Australia, but I don't think so.
Well, that's an interesting twist in the tale, isn't it? But obviously, from your perspective, the key thing is that George Thomas was vindicated, as it were, by Judge Radford, and that's the thought you have to keep at the forefront of your mind.
Yes.
Have you made any further inquiries about the case itself, or have you decided to put that aspect to bed?
Yes, I would like to try and get some kind of a pardon for George Thomas.
And how have you gone about that?
Well, you might well have heard of a well-known case about the hanging of Derek Bentley. So his niece, Maria Bentley Digwell, she has carried on the case and successfully, after 50 years, managed to get a pardon for Derek. So I thought she would be the best person who would know exactly where I would need to go for mine.
Hello, it's nice to meet you, Jeanette.
Finally.
In her quest to secure a pardon for George, Jeanette met with Maria Bentley Dingwall.
That's one of our pictures of Derek.
She was keen to ask advice about how Maria gained a pardon for her uncle Derek Bentley, who had been hanged for murder.
With the posthumous pardon, how did you go about that?
The steps we had to take, the first one was to do a petition so we could actually go for a pardon.
Right.
One setback in the campaign came in 1992, when the then Home Secretary Kenneth Clarke refused to grant a pardon to Derek.
We took him to the appeal courts and my family won an appeal against Kenneth Clarke.
Good.
Which is in the statute books, which is brilliant because other people can use it.
Yes, yes.
Everything we done, we wanted to make sure that it was to improve the law system.
For the next person who would have this injustice.
So, in the end, it took us about 46, 48 years. But
amazing.
It's worth it
Yes.
because any miscarriage of justice is a blight on our legal system.
Yes.
And I don't care if it's 180 years or 380 years.
Yes.
If we find out something and we can find our way to rectify it, then we should.
Yes, definitely.
What advice does Maria have for Jeanette in her pursuit of a posthumous pardon for George Thomas.
Contact your MP because you're going to need politicians behind you, but you've got lots of research to. You just got to think. You've got to pick.
Yes.
You've got to pick out things, and you've just got to be stubborn.
Yes.
It might seem arduous.
Yes.
But you've still got time.
Yes.
Yeah, it only took us 46 years, so, you've got a bit of time.
It's amazing that you've managed to meet Maria. Have you taken matters forward on the basis of that?
Yes, Maria says the best place to start would be with my local MP. So I have got in touch and he's very interested in the case.
As a first step in pursuing a posthumous pardon for George, Jeanette contacted her local MP, Pat McFadden. He agreed to a meeting at his constituency office in Bilston, near Wolverhampton.
Jeanette.
Hello.
Pleased to meet you. Come
And
in.
you?
Come in. Have a seat. So, Jeanette, you've come to talk to me about your relative, George Thomas, who was convicted of murdering Christina Collins
Yes.
a long, long time ago. What I'm keen to find out from you is what you'd like to happen now.
I would like to try and see if we can get some kind of a pardon for George.
You'd like me to contact the government now about this?
Yes, I would like your help. I might be able to get a pardon, I might not, but that's where I need your help.
Well, pardons are quite rare.
Yes.
The burden of proof is quite high. They can be given, and the way that this would work is you're my constituent, so having come to me to ask for help on this, what I would do is write to the Secretary of State for Justice.
Right.
It's a royal power, but it's exercised through ministers.
Yes.
And explain the basic facts of the case to him and ask him to look at this. Does that sound what you'd
That
like
would
me
be
to
very
do?
helpful, thank you.
It looks like you're really committed to taking this as far as you possibly can.
Well, I think with this situation, it's nice that we got as far as we did, but the story didn't finish there. Yeah. We need to make sure that this case carries on, and if we can, some way, try and get a pardon.
Well, Jeanette, many congratulations on all the action
Thank
you've been
you.
taking. I'm sure Sasha will join
Yes.
me in saying that, you know, we applaud your commitment and you're exhausting every possibility. And all I can say is that I wish you the very best of luck for the future.
Thank you. It might take quite a while, but yes, I'm going to carry on and persevere and hopefully get justice for George Thomas. I'm looking forward to the next chapter in the story.